Oh, that's a sweet background. Are you sure you're on Earth or?
I got spaceships too.
Yeah,
So, I like to always stay on brand, always in space.
absolutely. Zach, tell me about yourself. I mean, Lunar Water Supply Company, like how did that come about and what's your journey? Like where's this began? Because you're from Calgary originally.
Well, I've been here since 99. So I've been here for a while. Kind of lived all over Canada, but I guess my journey from space started as a kid, like it does for a lot of people. I remember seeing the Sojourner rover land in 1997. And this is like when the internet was brand new. So you could go to like NASA on your dial up and get like images from NASA. And it was the first time you could kind of see, live pictures. So one day there would be the desert or the Martian landscape, and the next little rover tracks on it. And I kind of thought to myself, well, if we can do rover tracks on Mars, can we do footprints? Right? Like, my 12-year-old brain was thinking about all that kind of stuff, and just sort of was always in the back of my head, was always kind of something I thought about. So I would pay attention to the space missions, what was going on, what people were finding out. But as I said, I finished high school in Alberta, kind of grew up here. There's not a lot of space going on. So I got my tech degree. I went to engineering school. I'm an electrical engineer, did some project management work, but always had space kind of in the back of my mind. So in 2014, I actually went to the International Space University for their program when it was in Montreal. And they change location every year. And that kind of, started me on the journey of I can actually do space. I can do those things. And I started talking to schools. I started going into other places and talking more about space and getting involved. And when people started to look at space resources and specifically water, the conversation was around mining, right? They talk about the mining industry and treating it like mining. But because it's water, sometimes it's frozen ice, sometimes it's liquid. And I was thinking about all the lessons learned and the technology available in the Alberta oil sands, which is very siloed, right? I mean, we have technology we've developed that is only in Alberta. There's like kind of one place where the oil sands happens. And no one in space knew about the tech in Alberta, and no one in Alberta is really talking about space resources. So I saw this gap and this opportunity. And over the last couple of years, I've been talking to folks and talking about that gap and kind of trying to close it. And then kind of COVID hit. I lost my job. I kept talking to folks, and then it kind of occurred to me, why don't we just start doing it? So myself and I have two other co-founders in Saskatchewan who are actually in the mining industry. We started this company, Lunar Water Supply, to go after lunar water using Western Canadian technology to sell in space.
What is the demand for that though?
Well, right now it's low. There's not a lot of things there. It's a bit of a chicken the egg, problem. If you imagine, when Henry Ford was building his first cars, you have this issue of I need to sell cars and build gas stations. No one's going to buy a car if there's no gas stations around, but the gas station is not going to go there if no one has cars. So you have to do both at the same time. Now, the Artemis mission is basically the sister mission to Apollo. So NASA's going back to the moon. Canada's going back to the moon. In 10 years, we're going to see Canadians set foot on the moon. So we're going to have Canadian footsteps on the moon in a decade. And this infrastructure is going to require water, right? We need to drink. We need to grow crops. And we can use it for rocket fuel. So you can split water.
Hydrogen, right? Okay.
Into hydrogen and oxygen, yeah. And you can use it for rocket fuel. So all of a sudden you have life support and you have transportation costs on the moon. Now, water is pretty heavy. Mm-hmm. So a liter of water is a kilogram of weight on Earth. And right now it costs about $4,000 to get a kilogram into orbit. So if you see, an astronaut in the International Space Station with a bottle of water, that bottle of water costs $4,000 to get up there.
Holy smokes.
So having water on the moon that you don't have to bring from Earth, is a game changer in terms of logistics, because it takes up a lot of weight, it takes up a lot of space, and it's really, really expensive. So a lot of folks are estimating that you can get water extracted and purified on the moon for $500 per liter, which sounds obscenely expensive until you remember that it costs $4,000 from Earth. And not too long ago, so that's $4,000 with all the new rockets, with all the SpaceX technology. When the space shuttle was flying, it was $20,000 per liter. So,
oh my God.
The acceleration of space exploration is rapidly gaining speed because of that cost difference. And getting water on the moon will increase it by another factor, right? It'll just make it that much more easier to transport. So that's why we're focusing on the water.
If you wanted to transfer water to Mars, is that from the moon? Is that about the same cost roughly?
But there's water on Mars as well.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
I didn't know that.
The idea behind this technology, it's called ISRU, Insitu Resource Utilization. So, if you imagine you're going camping, right? You pack all your food, all your water with you for the weekend, all your beer and stuff like that. You head out for the weekend and you come on back. But if you're going for a month or so, you don't pack all your food. You go to the grocery store and you buy it where you are. And that's the idea of ISRU. So you take with you a machine that could extract that resource instead of bringing the resource with you. It's the difference between bringing power bars or a greenhouse on a long duration mission. So the new architecture that people are working with is, how do we find resources where we're going? And that includes, manufacturing. People are looking at how to create bricks out of lunar regolith, so you can build habitats and build walls and domes and stuff like that. So you don't have to take all that with you from Earth. So that's going to be the big differentiation in the space race 2.0, is that you're not bringing everything with you. You're making it when you get there.
Canada's been important, and not many people know, in the arm, right? The robotic arm.
Absolutely.
What else have we done or contributed? And now, like you said, this new mission going to the moon, do you think your project can be launched in time?
Canada's been a huge player. It's in the great Canadian way. We don't take enough credit for what we do, right? We were the third nation in space. So the USSR launched with Sputnik 1, right? That's the famous satellite. The US was next with Explorer 1. And Canada was actually the third country to go into space with the Alouette satellite. Okay. So we've been in the space races, almost since day one. Many Canadians were involved in designing the Apollo lunar lander. And like you said, the Canada arm has been a staple of space exploration since the 80s. The space station would not exist the way it is without the Canada arm.
Wow.
So we've earmarked $2 billion to build the third generation Canada arm that's going to be on the Lunar Gateway space station. And we've signed a month or two ago an agreement for ground activities. So that's how a Canadian's going to get on the moon. And right now, Canada's looking at putting a rover on the moon, doing geology experiments. So, this is all happening in real time. Just yesterday, the CSA was talking about growing food and experimenting in northern Canada about growing food in closed loop greenhouses. And that's technically be used on the moon and Mars. So, right now we are contributing to this space exploration science and engineering in a big way, which I don't think a lot of Canadians really, hear about.
Do you find like has anyone tested the water quality out in on the moon, like such as its nutrients, its fluoride, and all?
They haven't.
No.
So, we know very little about the lunar geology. And, that's kind of the exciting part. It's basically a black box. So we have data going back all the way to Apollo about, what's there, but nobody's done a core sample. No one's drilled down to see what's underneath there. The material that's brought back to go into the lab. So Apollo brought moon rocks back. The Chinese last month actually launched a mission and they got moon rocks back and they're doing analysis on them. But there hasn't been that much in recent years. Now it's changing. Like in 2023, there's going to be 2 drills on Mars, one from NASA and one from the European Space Agency. So in the next 5 years, we're going to be getting a lot of data back that tells us, how much water, how much salt is in the water, what impurities are in the water. Even things like, how stable is the ground? If you were to put a big piece of machinery on the surface, would it sink?
Yeah.
Yeah, just stuff like that we take for granted. We don't know any of the answers. So there's a lot of exploration that's going to be happening in the next 5 years to answer all these questions.
Zach, could people live on the moon? It might be a silly question, but
yeah, for sure. Now it'll be different absolutely be different than on Earth.
But we always talk about Mars. You always hear about Mars. You never hear about let's live on the moon.
Yeah. So there are 2 schools of thought on this, right? So the moon is relatively close to us. It takes about a week or so to get to the moon if you want to travel there. So the space station, the ISS right now, if something were to happen, the astronauts could be back on Earth in about 10 to 15 minutes, right? They could hit the button, hop in there in the escape crafts and be back on Earth. The moon, not so much. It'd be at least a week until they could be back on Earth. Mars, it's 6 months to be back on Earth if something goes wrong. So the moon is like a test bed, right? Where we can try and figure out how this technology goes with a bit of a safety margin in there to say you're still within range of a supply mission or a rescue mission or something like that. Mars, the reason why a lot of people talk about Mars and living on Mars is because you have to live on Mars without the help from Earth. 6 months is just too long to get a supply mission, and you have to be within a launch window. So the launch window only shows up every 2 years. So if you're on the other side of the solar system, because of the rotation of the planet, it could be a year and a half until help arrives. So you have to live on your own. And that's the big step on living on Mars. And then that's one of the major differences in the mission architecture between those 2. So that's why you don't hear that much about the moon, because it still is within the kind of that safety margin.
Oh, of course. Do we have a planet where it's very close to Earth or very similar to living like on Earth?
No, not really.
With
Mars,
all the layers?
Yeah, Mars would be the closest that we have. And that's why people would look to Mars to build, the kind of the biggest colonies there. But Earth is very, very special in its place in the solar system and what's on it.
Not many people know this, but you were actually awarded, or you were given the opportunity on the first list for MarsOne.
I was. So yes. that was kind of my foot in the door. I was always, dreaming about space. And then I think it was 2010, 2011, when MarsOne showed up, and my friends kind of emailed me like, well, here's your chance. If you want to go to space, this is it. So I put my application in, and I actually made it into the first round. There was 1,000 of us or so around the world that got in. Now MarsOne has since gone bankrupt and doesn't exist anymore. But that was the first time that I ever thought of myself as being in the space industry rather than just having it as a hobby, right? So I know a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about MarsOne and how all went down, but for me, you know, it was the first time I felt included. And that's kind of when I started going to conferences, started meeting people. That's how I got to go to the International Space University. In 2018, I was in Utah. I spent 2 weeks in a Mars simulation, pretending we were on Mars with the Mars Society.
How was that, by the way?
Interesting. You know, well, you know, we're all in lockdown now, so we all have an idea of what isolation feels like. But during the simulation, you know, you couldn't go outside without a spacesuit on. We're eating freeze-dried food. There's a communication delay between Earth and Mars. So it was kind of going through the steps and giving you an idea of what it would be like to live on a base like that. You know, and these analogs are really, really important, just to get the feeling, right? You know, I think listeners in Alberta will understand, you know, it's the difference between designing an oil field plant and like actually going to the field, right? You'll learn a lot more even just by spending a week in the field and be like, oh, that's how it works. I get it. So, you know, there's about a dozen of these analog sites all around the world that do this kind of research to try and iron out the kinks and figure out, hey, you know, some do spacesuits, some do food. Actually, how long can you eat the same food without going crazy? You know, stuff like that.
Was there a moment in your life where you're just like, I love planet Earth, I don't want to go to Mars?
A little. I mean, it's you know, in space movies, you know, when they're in space station, they land back on Earth and like they feel the wind on their face. I felt that because you don't go out, when you go outside, you have to be covered head to toe in your suit, and you don't feel the wind. You can't really hear nature. And then walking outside without, you know, that helmet on, it's a huge difference. Like you really do feel that connection to Earth. It only takes like a week or two for that like to show up. So
it was a simulation. Was there zero gravity in certain areas?
I mean, we can't really do that on Earth, but as close as we possibly can. So, you know, we had our water reserves. We had to maintain our water, our power levels, you know, all those kind of mission parameters. So as close as we could get to Mars.
It's really interesting to see that where you are today is from that one leap of a hobby, a passion, a love for space is why you are creating, you know, with your co-founders, the Lunar Water Supply company. Now, that's brave of you just to, because not many people know about MarsOne, but it was literally, they're going to send you out there and you're there forever. What was your family thinking?
It was interesting to me. So I had previously been in the military reserves, and you know, the Army is a job where your life is at risk. Like it's your job to go into dangerous situations. And when I joined the Army, I was never deployed or anything like that. But when I joined up, you know, no one asked me, what does your family think about you joining the Army? But when I wanted to become an explorer, that actually became like a huge issue. And it's interesting to see the public's perception of, you know, what is a job that we know and what is a job we're not comfortable with, and, you know, what's kind of unknown about it. And I actually started bringing my mother to all the talks because someone would say, what does your mother think of you doing?
Of course, yeah.
I said, well, she's right here. If you want to ask her after the talk, here she is. But, you know, my friends and family knew it was something that I loved, that I had a passion for. It's, you know, when you talk to heli skiers and you say, this is dangerous, your life is at risk when you jump out of that helicopter. But if you know a heli skier, you know there's nowhere else they'd rather be than on the mountain. And it's the same kind of thing. I think space exploration is one of the most important things we could be doing. Now, I don't know if it's going to be me, you know, physically going to the moon and Mars, but if I can, you know, do my part
And help facilitate and guide. Yeah.
Help facilitate that, provide a resource, provide that engineering help to build that infrastructure. That's what I'm going to do.
Do you see Albertans vested into Lunar Water Supply Company just yet?
We're in the very, very early stages. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we founded this company in October. But I think Western Canada and Alberta specifically have a huge role to play in space resources. So, when we think of resources in Western Canada, they're in remote sites, right? Going to the field for us, like hopping on an airplane, going on 2-week, a few month rotations is normal. That's something that no one would bat an eye at. Having remote facilities, having, when I was up at Fort Mac and we go out in the wintertime and we go to site in the wintertime, you've got your winter gear on, you've got your PP on, you've signed out your form, people know where you are, you've taken your safety training courses, everything is laid out, everything is, orchestrated. We do this as normal job performance. That's what we do.
It's second nature to us.
It is absolutely second nature to us. I don't think it's been on display several times. You think of the Fort McMurray fires, mm-hmm. how quickly that city was evacuated. You look at the flooding in Calgary and how quickly the community came together and cleaned up the city. We had Stampede that year.
Yeah, I remember.
3 weeks after the flood, right? We were helicoptering in equipment and, pumping out water and, getting her done. Nowhere else in the world are you going to see that happen. So we do this already. We are moon miners already. We just don't know it yet.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So, as far-fetched, when I talk to people that say, oh, I don't do that, and I have to convince them, you do. You
100%.
do this already. You're the best in the world at this already. There's huge opportunity for us out there. We're talking about Alberta breaking even at $50 a barrel, right? Which I think is a couple cents a liter of oil, right? That works out to.
It is.
And I'm talking about selling water at $500 a liter on the moon. So we're talking about commodity prices, and we're talking about, the break even. There's a huge, huge opportunity for us. And in the future, that's going to include, precious metals. It's going to include copper, titanium, steel. All these things are available for us out in space. It is my supreme hope that the next 50 years are going to look significantly different than the last 50.
I agree. And I think COVID has pivoted a lot of people's mindsets as well, mm-hmm. and to figure out what's next. And I mean, I'm sure for yourself, you're like, well, Alberta is kind of struggling as well. And we have been struggling before all of this has happened, obviously with the oil fields and the mm-hmm. patch. I wonder if people in the patch are going to realize that, there is another opportunity, and people in Western Canada are going to realize that, hey, we're not just oil and gas. Because that's where we really struggle, is we're only known for oil and gas. Like you said, the last 50 years, that's all we've been. And I don't think oil and gas will go away. I just don't think it's going to be our sole. And I think we've seen that this time around,
Yeah. I've been talking about this for several years. And pre-COVID, people were, that's very, very interesting. Let me know when you're making, $1 million a year, then we'll talk, kind of thing.
Of course they'll say that, right? Right when you're making it, that's when we'll talk.
Yeah. Let me know and I'll jump on the bandwagon, right? And I think, like you mentioned, COVID has accelerated that mindset that we can do other things. We can have 80% of our population working from home. That's something that could happen. And the dip in demand for oil and just looking outside of that. And the good thing about space resource is that it doesn't take a lot of retraining. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about other industries, I don't want to pick on renewable energy. I'm a big fan of renewables, but if you tell an oil sands worker, let's go make wind turbines and solar panels. It's kind of a big jump. So
Of course, yeah.
there are some that do. There's a group called Iron and Earth that are doing exactly that. But that's not going to work for the geologists. That's not going to work for the chemical engineers. That's not going to work for the exploratory engineers. But space resources will. So, this is the exact same skill sets we have in a new industry. It's still far out, right? This is not something we're going to be working on tomorrow and employing thousands of people.
No, of course.
But it took the oil sands, right? The first oil sands experiments were going on in the 60s.
Yep. I think, where did we go? We went Turner Valley. I mean, one of our first wells were, I think, Turner Valley or Waterton. It was somewhere around there where one of our first pump jacks were actually built in Alberta.
Yeah. So we went from in the 1900s, like oil, pumping out oil. But we went to the oil sands out in Athabasca. It was the 1960s when someone first thought it possible. The first companies were made in the 70s. They weren't profitable until the 1990s. And then, became huge. And the 2000s, right? The boom came, everything was amazing, everything was great. But then, climate change, demand curves, and all those things, come up, and we say, well, this is an issue. So we have the same kind of roadmap with space resources, and right now we're in that exploratory phase. We're in it's 1965 in the oil sands, right? And if you get in now, those folks that get in now
are the ones that are gonna,
right? They're gonna build that roadmap, and it's not just us. So Luxembourg is involved in this. The US is involved in this. Australia, China, India, Japan. They're all looking at space resources. So this is the new international gold rush that's happening.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, I don't know if you know about the history of the Yukon and the Dawson City gold rush. Yeah.
And that's it. And it's not just gold rush, right? It's like everything. When we talk about, the Earth has limited resources, that's absolutely true. The Earth does have limited resources, but we can leave the Earth and we can go other places to find resources elsewhere. So our growth, if everyone was to live at North American living standards, right, the Earth couldn't sustain us. But it could if we take our resources from outside Earth. So this is where, if we imagine ourselves 100 years from now, how do we actually get people out of poverty? How do we actually do that? We do that by getting space resources and bringing them to Earth and actually building things outside of Earth. If you think of, mining and manufacturing, what if we were building computer chips on a space station on Earth? Think of all the byproducts. Think of all those trash heaps you see of all the broken parts and tailings ponds and all that negative part of manufacturing. If that's in space, there's literally no environment there. There's nothing to wreck.
Why didn't we think of this earlier?
Yeah, well, it just wasn't possible earlier, right? So you could be making computer chips and all the waste products. If you don't want it, you can literally just throw them into the sun and they're gone.
Speaking of computer chips, I don't know about if in certain areas of third world countries, they actually fry the chips in the pans and then they take out the copper and gosh, imagine the mercury and
absolutely. Let's stop that, right? We have the opportunity to kind of reframe our entire supply chain. So it's a very exciting time. And yeah, I want to be right in the middle of it.
Zac, does LWSC, is it going to be a consulting company or is it going to be, what are you guys going to be known as?
We want to be a water.
In 10 years, what's your goal? You have a goal.
Our goal is to be on the moon selling water. So we want to have a valve on the moon and we turn it on and that water goes to our customer, and that customer might be NASA, it might be SpaceX for their rockets. It could be a Chinese company doing something, but we want to be a water utility supplying water on the moon.
The ATCO.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, how does this work? So, if we go to the oil sands, we're like, okay, that's CNRL, that's Shell, Suncor. In the moon, how do you claim that's my plot of land?
That you have just asked a very, very important legal question, and there isn't an answer for it. Wow. So lawyers are working on this issue right now. The law, as it stands, is that no country, no government is allowed to claim sovereignty over any celestial object. So the US can't claim the moon for the US or anything like that. And that law was written to avoid World War III in space between the USSR and the US during the Cold War. Now, the US and Luxembourg and a few others have decided to kind of put a loophole in that to say, if I'm a company and I take a resource and I value add that resource, then I can own it. So if I come across a plot of ice, I can melt it and purify it, but I won't be able, then I can sell that water. That water is now mine, I own it, and I can sell it. And in the Artemis Accords, which Canada is a signatory, it basically has an exclusionary area around where you land. So you don't necessarily own a plot of land or a plot of resources, but if you put your plant down, there's kind of a safety ring around you that says this is your area of operations. If you can extract something from this area of operations, you can then sell it. Now, this has obviously never been tried before, but that's kind of the law that's standing, and we just kind of have to move forward and see how the whole thing unfolds in practice.
It's gonna be interesting, isn't it?
It absolutely will be interesting. Yeah. So, the technology is happening at the same time the laws are being created, and we're seeing how the impact will be at the same time, as that. So, platinum right now is $1,000 per ounce. So if someone were to go in and pick up some platinum and come in and suddenly flood the market with platinum, and that price drops, that's going to have a huge effect on everything. So, yeah, and some people want to have stable markets and not have that happen. Other people who use platinum is in electrodes in like car batteries for electric cars. It's one of the most expensive parts there. If that drops and you can add more platinum, you can get more length out of them. You can build better batteries. So there are so many moving parts and things that will knock on once this economy is up and running.
How quickly do you think we would focus on rocket fuel versus water out in the moon? Or would they be simultaneously both going forward?
Yeah, so rocket fuel, the water used for rocket fuel is one of the first applications of that. So a company called Orbit Fab is actually they've developed a fueling nozzle on satellites, and satellites are being launched right now that can be refueled. Oh. So they're already setting the stage for, in 10, 15 years, we can actually have a tanker truck pull up to these satellites, refuel them and reservice them, put in new chips, new circuit boards, and upgrade them rather than crash them into the atmosphere. So the infrastructure is already being built to accept the water as a fuel resource.
Do you see people, or do you get questioned on people asking you, hey, Zac, why are you guys looking at the moon and the orbit rather than working on the water supply here on planet Earth? All
the time. Yeah. It's a question of space in general. Why are we going to space when we have problems here on Earth? But we're always going to have problems on Earth. True. I mean, they're never going to go away. Some will be bigger than others, but we're always going to have problems. If you've ever been in business, they'll do things like stretch goals, right? You're gonna take something that seems really far out, and you're gonna try and find a way to achieve it. And that's what space is. So I like to use the example of food. We're going to put, let's say, 10 astronauts on the moon, and they're going to be there for a few months. If we can learn how to feed 10 astronauts for 3 months on the moon, we can feed towns in northern Canada with food without having to truck them in, right? We can feed desert cities in on the world. The UAE is very excited about lunar bases because they're mostly desert. They want to figure out how can we grow food for a growing population in the desert. So they're banking on this technology to develop, that stretch goal on the moon. Once we can figure that out, doing it in the desert is going to be simple. That's going to be the easy part. So that's what space is to me. Space to me is that stretch goal. We will never figure out a better way to do things if we're always doing the same thing over and over and over again on Earth. You gotta get out of your comfort zone. You gotta go to these environments, and you gotta try new things. And that's what I find so exciting, is we're gonna come up with all kinds of new engineering and new ways of doing stuff.
Is there another Alberta company or another Western Canadian company doing what you guys are doing?
There are 2 other Canadian companies that I know of that are going after space resources. There are plenty of companies doing similar things in satellites and remote sensing. So our first task, because we don't know a lot about the geology, is actually doing a geological survey of the moon and doing a reserve study to see how much is there. And that tech is just coming into its own. So a lot of big companies are using satellite imagery to do their construction technologies, to do their environmental tech. You see it in farming as well, that farmers will buy satellite data to move around their crops and things like that. Walmart actually doesn't count the number of customers by how many customers go through the till anymore. They just get satellite imagery of the parking lot and count the cars. That's how they figure out how many people are going to their stores. It's so much cheaper. So there's a company in Canada called GHG Sat that is monitoring methane emissions and greenhouse emissions from orbit. So you don't have to ask the company to put in instrumentation and check all these things anymore. You can just fly the satellite over, take a measurement, and you can tell exactly how much methane they're emitting.
My gosh, yeah.
So, all these areas and all these niche applications are just coming online right now, and the cost, like I said earlier, is dropping, allowing for these companies to launch satellites and operate this way. So there's all kinds of opportunities to do business differently and do operations differently, which I think COVID, is teaching people to be more flexible. You have to be. So, it is terrible. I wish COVID never happened. I wish it, wasn't an issue. I wish we could have all done like New Zealand and been it over with and been back to normal. But I think the silver lining is that it's accelerated people's comfort level with change. So hopefully that will help us bring in those positive changes and make us all better for it.
What did you find positive coming out of COVID? I mean, we're still in it, but what have you found? Obviously, starting this business with your partners is one thing. Mm-hmm. What else have you found for yourself in life?
It's helped really focus what's important, right? In the first couple of months, there were a lot of things that seemed important that really aren't anymore. What you can count on, kind of what you can do yourself, doing more readings, just being with yourself.
Present. Yeah.
Yeah, and figuring out, hey, this is who I am and this is what's going on. So, um, and we've talked about, with my wife and my friends about, um, this must have been what life was like 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It's a lot. It feels slower and faster at the same time. The days kind of blend together, but you celebrate your wins more, right? They're actually more meaningful. They're more important. So, I'm excited to hang out with friends and see people again. And I think, that's going to be that much more meaningful.
I'm with
When
you
we
on
get
that.
back to do it.
It's the pause. The pause is so nice. And it's not just, oh, pause on work. It's pause on the rat race of running around. We were just going, and where? No,
Yeah.
there's no purpose. They're just, hey, want to go out with friends? Want to go do some business? Want to go? Nothing was, that's what life was. Now you can really hone in on yourself too. And
Yeah.
your loved ones. Yeah, I agree.
So that's been interesting. Still a learning curve.
Yeah.
But I hope that that's something we take with us and really build stronger connections coming out of this.
Zac, do you believe that there is life on other planets?
Yeah, I absolutely do. Not, they might not be little green men. I don't think we have visitors from other worlds, stealing people off and making crop circles. But when we look at, not on the moon is 99.9% sure it's a dead planet. But when we go to Mars has all the chemistry that's needed for life. It has all the building blocks that's needed for life. So, the way I explain, if you go to Mars, it's like walking into a dirty kitchen and you see flour spilt on the counter and you see a container of sugar and you think someone could have been making a cake here, but we haven't found the cake yet. We don't know there's a cake, but we see everything there that means a cake could have been made. And the mission that's landing in February on Mars is going to be checking for life, directly checking for life. So that's what part of Perseverance's mission is going to be, which we haven't done since the Viking in the 70s. There's also the ice moons. When we go to Europa, there's ice about 20 kilometers thick, and then there's an ocean underneath that moon. Europa has more water on it than Earth does. So we think of all that ocean, and we know if you go deep, deep down into the Earth's ocean, you can find those volcanic vents, and light doesn't penetrate down there, right? There's no light, but they have little crabs and shrimps and bacteria that live on these volcanic spires. So it's completely possible that deep in this ocean, there could be, tiny alien shrimps down there. We've never checked. We've never gone and looked to see if there are. So there are so many places in the solar system to go and look for these mysteries that I hope we're going to start funding, and we're going to start looking in all these locations, because there's mysteries to be solved. We just need to go looking.
Can people from Western Canada or Albertans be a part of your new venture here? How can they be a part of it?
Yeah, right now we're actually doing interviews with planetary scientists and geologists to try and figure out exactly how do we start answering these questions, and what do we need to start looking for to make sure that we find these answers, right? We need to do geological surveying. We need to get drills onto Mars or onto the moon and drill into the surface to check what's there. Mm-hmm. Now, how do we can't use drilling mud because it would freeze. The gravity's different. So when we rely on gravity to push down on the drill bit when we drill, so we can't really rely on that.
No.
We need to re-engineer how we do all these things. Water filtration, right? How are we gonna filter the water when it's minus 170 degrees C outside? How are we going to heat it up? How are we going to do all this? There's all these engineering problems that we need to start working on.
Can you ever see a grocery store on the moon or on Mars if you had to pick?
To pick which one? I'd rather have a grocery store on Mars. Again, because it's far away. The moon, you can always get that freeze-dried food sent to you in a week. Mars, not so much.
Not so much. Okay. Interesting.
There's a lot of engineering to do, and we have a lot of engineers sitting around doing nothing right now in Alberta. So we're talking to the government of Canada. We're talking to the space agency to figure out how can we get funding to start solving these engineering problems? How can we get people working on these things?
How quickly can you see the government helping or assisting Lunar Water Supply Company?
Hopefully quickly. Hopefully this year we'll see some movement. Again, we're already chatting with them. They are funding lunar exploration programs already, specifically on some of their rover programs. So we're talking to them about funding resource events. And like I said, there's actually 2 other companies in Canada that are also talking to the government. So it's not just us. There is a bit of an industry starting here.
Which is kind of exciting in a way.
Yeah,
it
is. And we're talking about starting an industry association, right? Like we have, how many different associations about the oil, right? So, to have that voice to say, here's what we need and here's what's going on. We're on the basement level of building this industry here in Canada.
Perfect. I appreciate you talking with me today, Zac.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Is there something that you could leave the Western Canadian listeners with, or Canadians in general, about Lunar Water Supply and yourself?
You know what, is to dream big. And in Western Canada, that's what we're really good at. My wife's family, they're farmers in Saskatchewan, and they know the history going back, they settled there. And that land is not very hospitable, right? Look outside your window and imagine living in a log cabin in Alberta. We rely on technology to keep us alive in this province. If we didn't have heat in our homes, we didn't have clothes on our back, we wouldn't be doing so great here right now. As I said, we do this out of habit. It's born into us as Canadians, especially in Western Canada. We are good at this. We are the world leaders at this. And there's a tremendous opportunity for us if we just believe that we can do it. There's a very bright future for us, and I hope that we can all go there. It's going to be amazing.
I appreciate you so much for this, Zac, and thank you. And I look forward to this journey and following you and seeing how this all unfolds. Yeah,
it's going to be great.
This is just a start of something so beautiful, so I'm excited.
I think so too.
Thanks so much, Zac.
Awesome.
All right. See ya. Yeah.